Hello, anatomy friends. This is Dr. Alsup, and in this first video for session 2, we're going to focus on some of the core terms that we need to understand about the nervous system. We'll be using this throughout the year, not only in anatomy, but in other parts of the curriculum as well. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, by the end of this video, you should be able to answer this learning objective in your own words. So you're going to be able to distinguish between the structures and the terminology of the central nervous system, or CNS, as well as the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. And while we usually consider these systems independently, they are very much interconnected. And that interconnectivity influences the presentation of the clinical disorders. All right, so let's jump right in and distinguish the CNS from the PNS. The central nervous system is simply just the brain and the spinal cord. If you think about the brain and the spinal cord, they're kind of the integration centers. They're the coordinators of the incoming and outgoing signals. The peripheral nervous system is the nervous tissue outside of the CNS. So anything nervous that isn't the brain or spinal cord. If you think of the brain and spinal cord as the core, the term peripheral makes more sense. It is anything beyond that core. It is peripheral to the core. Usually when we think about the PNS, we usually think about nerves. And that makes sense because that is the bulk of the PNS. We'll also talk a little bit about ganglia as well. So there are two main types of nerves. There are cranial nerves and their branches, of which there are 12 pairs, as well as 31 branches, or excuse me, 31 pairs, as well as their branches of spinal nerves. All right, excellent. Now, this is one of the core concepts of this video. Although the CNS and PNS are often described separately, they really aren't separate. They are very much functionally as well as anatomically continuous. So those nerves are coming right off the spinal cord or right off the brain in terms of the cranial nerves. Very much connected. They are not actually separated by anything. All right, before we get into the different parts of the CNS and PNS, let's describe some terms that apply to all nervous tissue. And really the most basic of basic is this term neuron. Another name for a neuron is a nerve cell. This is the main structural and functional unit of the nervous system. So a lot of the structures we're going to discuss are of a neuron or a part of a neuron. Neurons are specialized for rapid communication. There are three main parts of a neuron. There is the cell body, which is where all the organelles hang out, like the nucleus and the mitochondria. You'll also have dendrites, of which there are varying amounts. Dendrite means a little tree, so the processes resemble small branches. The processes that are dendrites resemble small branches of a tree or say like a bush. Now, dendrites receive and carry impulses towards or to the cell body. Axons are cellular processes that carry pulses away from the cell body. These are often myelinated, which means myelin is layers of lipids. This allows for increased speed of signal transmission. So the length of an axon varies significantly throughout the body. Axons are the major component of what is called a nerve fiber. So a nerve fiber is something we'll discuss a little bit later on in the video. Okay, so now that we know what a neuron is, let's talk about structures that you will only have in the central nervous system. If you take a cross-section of the brain or the spinal cord, you will see that the tissue has differing shades. So some of the tissue will look grayer and some of the tissue will look whiter. So the gray matter consists primarily of neuronal cell bodies and some other stuff like proximal dendrites, axon terminals. But it's the kind of the star, what we want to get across here is that gray matter is composed of cell bodies. The gray matter is most visible on the outer or superficial surface of the brain, cerebral cortex. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then there'll also be these deeper collections of cell bodies in the brain that are quite deep. And these are called nuclei, or one more than one will be nuclei. And then, of course, the singular is nucleus. The gray matter of the spinal cord forms a butterfly shape on the inner portion. So it's going to be deep within the spinal cord. And these wings of the butterfly are referred to as horns. So you'll have ventral horns and dorsal horns. Sometimes you'll even have lateral horns, all things that we'll discuss in a bit more detail in an upcoming video. Okay, so gray matter, that's where cell bodies are hanging out. Now let's consider the white matter. This nervous tissue is often myelinated, and that myelination gives the tissue that distinct white color. White matter is composed of aggregations of axons, so just organization of axons together, and that these discrete interconnecting fiber systems are called tracts. Tracts typically perform a common function, and the tracts may even be further combined into columns, particularly when we're talking about the spinal cord. So, for example, this lateral column has a common function for transporting motor and sensory signals, but specifically relating to the limbs and torso. So you'll have organizations like that throughout the spinal cord. All right. Let's move to some terms that are specific to the peripheral nervous system. As mentioned before, the nerve is the main one. So nerves are those fiber bundles that we talked about a little bit earlier. So remember that main component of a nerve fiber is an axon. So nerves are nerve fiber, oh my goodness, nerve fiber bundles plus connective tissue. That connective tissue will package together the nerve fiber bundles. And of course, you always need a vascular supply as well. So the nerve is more complex than just one axon. It's a lot of axons kind of combined to form what we can visibly see oftentimes in a nerve. Also a part of the PNS are ganglia. If you're talking plural, ganglion is singular. These are similar to the nucleus in the CNS. So a ganglion is a collection of cell bodies, but specifically outside of the CNS. There are both motor, which are part of the autonomic nervous system, and sensory ganglia. Now, as we discussed at the beginning of the video, the CNS and PNS are very much continuous, and that has huge clinical implications. So, for example, a CNS pathology, so a pathology that happens to the brain or spinal cord, say such as multiple sclerosis or stroke, can lead to altered motor and sensory functions. And these manifest as peripheral symptoms, such as not being able to contract muscles that are innervated by peripheral nerves. So this interconnectivity really highlights the importance of a comprehensive neurological exam. So just because something is presenting peripherally doesn't mean that the source cause isn't within the central nervous system. So much, much, much more to come here, particularly in the neurology section of this curriculum. But it's important to begin to consider this as a core concept. All right, excellent. We have reached the summary slide, an excellent resource for pulling out those high-yield concepts and for studying for your assessments. Please always feel free to reach out with any questions, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.